The night Elena Vaskov stepped off the plane at Denver International Airport, the air was so cold it cut straight through her thin coat. She had worn it on purpose, her best coat, a pale blue wool that her mother had saved up for months to buy. She wanted to look nice. She wanted to make a good first impression. After all, she was about to meet the man she had agreed to marry. His name was Dale Mercer. He was 51 years old, a farmer from a small town in rural Colorado called Hartwell. She had found his profile on an international matchmaking website called Forever Together, where men from small American towns searched for women willing to start a new life far from home. Elena was 32, from a struggling city in Ukraine, and she had been thinking about this decision for 2 full years before she finally said yes. The messages between them had been warm. Dale wrote in careful, slow sentences that felt honest. He told her about his land, 200 acres of dry Colorado soil that he had inherited from his father. He told her about the farmhouse, which needed work but had good bones. He told her he was lonely, and that he wanted a partner, not just someone to cook and clean. Elena had believed him. She still believed him as she stood at the arrival's gate, her single large suitcase beside her, scanning faces in the crowd. He was easy to spot. A tall man in a brown jacket, holding a piece of paper with her name written in large, careful letters. He looked older than his photos, his face more lined, his hair thinner. But his eyes were kind, or at least they looked kind in that first moment. He smiled when he saw her, a slow, hesitant smile, like a man who was not used to being happy and did not quite trust the feeling. They shook hands at the gate, which felt strange to her. She had expected something warmer. But she reminded herself that American customs were different, that people here did not embrace strangers so quickly. She smiled back and told him his English was better than she expected. He laughed, a short, surprised laugh, and said her English was better than his. The drive to Hartwell took almost 3 hours. They talked a little, fell silent, talked again. Dale pointed out landmarks along the way, a mountain range turning purple in the distance, a diner where he sometimes stopped for coffee, the road sign that marked the edge of his county. Elena watched everything through the window and tried to memorize it all. This was her life now. These flat roads, this wide dark sky, this quiet man sitting next to her who smelled faintly of engine oil and something sweet like dried grass. They arrived at the farmhouse just after midnight. It was bigger than she had imagined but darker too, with one porch light burning yellow against the black fields behind it. Dale carried her suitcase inside and showed her the room he had prepared for her. A clean room with a new quilt on the bed and a small lamp on the nightstand. There were flowers in a glass on the dresser, wild flowers, slightly wilted, as if he had picked them earlier in the day and they had been waiting for her ever since. She stood in the middle of that room for a long time after he said goodnight and closed the door. She looked at the flowers. She looked at the lamp. She looked at her suitcase, still closed, sitting on the floor. And she thought to herself that maybe this was going to be all right. Maybe she had made the right choice. Maybe, in this quiet house at the edge of a dark field in a country that was not her own, she was finally going to find something worth staying for. She did not sleep well that first night. But she did not leave either. Not yet. The first week was careful and polite. Dale made coffee every morning before she woke up, and he left it warm on the stove with a note that said simply, "Good morning." He was not a man of many words, but he seemed to mean the ones he used. He showed her around the property, explained the routines of the farm, and introduced her to his neighbor, a retired woman named Berta who lived half a mile down the road and seemed genuinely thrilled that Dale had finally found someone. But somewhere between the end of the first week and the beginning of the second, something shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no sudden cruelty. It was more like a door slowly closing, so slow you almost did not notice until the light was completely gone. Dale began asking questions. Not curious questions but tracking questions. Where was she going? How long would she be gone? Who had she spoken to on the phone? He checked her phone once, pretending he had picked it up by accident, but she saw his eyes move across the screen before he handed it back. He started sitting at the kitchen table in the evenings instead of watching television in the living room, positioned so that he could see the front door from where he sat. Elena told herself it was anxiety. He had waited a long time for someone and he was probably afraid she would leave. She understood fear. She had her own. She had left behind everything she knew, her language, her neighborhood, her mother's voice available at any hour, and she was here in this house where the nearest town was 40 minutes away and she did not yet have a driver's license for this country. She was dependent on him. She knew it. And she began to suspect that he knew it too. By the third week he had stopped making the morning coffee notes. He had also made a comment, quiet and almost gentle, about the cost of international phone calls, and suggested she limit her calls home to once a week. Elena had nodded and said she understood. But something inside her had gone very still and very alert, the way an animal goes still when it senses something wrong in the air. She started paying attention differently. She noticed that he always had an excuse for why she should not go to town alone. He noticed that whenever she mentioned meeting Berta for coffee, something urgent always came up on the farm. She noticed that the one time she had asked about English classes in the nearest city, Dale had said it was too far, too expensive, and that her English was already perfectly fine. She was not a stupid woman. She had a university degree in accounting. She had managed finances for a small business back home. She understood systems, and she understood, slowly and then all at once, that she was living inside one. The realization did not make her panic. It made her quiet. She smiled at dinner. She helped with the chickens in the morning. She let Dale believe that she was settling in, becoming comfortable, becoming his. She asked no more questions about English classes or driving lessons or the nearest bus station. She asked instead about the history of the farm, about his parents, about the land. She listened to every answer with great attention. And while she listened, she was building something inside her head. A map. Of every road she had seen through the car window. Of every person she had met. Of every small detail that might one day be a way out. She was not planning to disappear yet. But she had already started preparing. It happened on a Tuesday in early March, 6 weeks after Elena had arrived. The fields outside were still frozen, the sky the color of dirty snow. Dale had driven into town that morning for supplies and told her he would be back by noon. He was not back by noon. He was not back by 2. At 3 in the afternoon, Elena heard the truck pull up outside, and she knew immediately from the sound of the door slamming that something was different. He came into the house without taking off his boots, which he never did. He set a paper bag on the counter and turned to look at her, and she saw in his face something she had not seen before, not anger exactly but a kind of cold certainty, the look of a man who has decided something and is now simply carrying it out. He had found her notebook. She kept a small notebook in the lining of her suitcase, tucked into a seam she had carefully opened and re-sewn. In it she had written the names and phone numbers she had quietly collected over 6 weeks. Berta's number. The number of a Ukrainian community center she had found online during the 1 hour per day Dale allowed her on the shared computer. The number of a legal aid organization she had seen advertised on a notice board at the post office on the one occasion she had accompanied Dale to town. She did not know how he had found it. Maybe he had searched her suitcase while she was outside. Maybe he had seen the seam. It did not matter now. He set the notebook on the kitchen table between them, open to a page she recognized. He did not shout. He spoke very quietly, which was somehow worse. He told her that he had spent a great deal of money bringing her here. He told her that he had done everything right, everything proper, that he was not a bad man, that she had no reason to be doing research and collecting phone numbers like she was planning something. He told her she was confused, that she had misunderstood the situation, that they were building something together and she needed to trust the process. Elena listened. She kept her face very calm and her hands still on the table. She said yes, she understood. She said she was sorry she had worried him. She said the notebook was nothing, just habit, she liked to write things down. She said she was not planning anything. He watched her for a long time. Then he picked up the notebook and put it in his jacket pocket. He told her they would talk more about this later. He went into the living room and turned on the television, and that was the end of the conversation. That night, Elena lay in the dark and understood that she had reached the end of the quiet waiting period. Whatever was going to happen next was going to happen soon, because he now knew she had been paying attention, and a man like Dale could not tolerate that knowledge for very long without doing something about it. She had no notebook anymore. She had no phone numbers. She had $11 in small change she had collected from coat pockets and the bottom of his truck on the days she was left alone. She had her passport, which she had hidden separately from the notebook, taped flat beneath the bottom drawer of her dresser. And she had one more thing. 3 weeks earlier, on the one visit to town, she had memorized a phone number from that notice board at the post office. She had not written it down. She had repeated it to herself every morning since then like a prayer. She said it again now, silently, in the dark. 10 digits her way out. She did not know yet how she would get to a phone. But she knew that she would. She had not come this far, survived this much, to stay trapped in a farmhouse in the middle of frozen Colorado until someone gave her permission to be free. By the next morning, Dale seemed to have decided to pretend that nothing had happened. He made coffee. He said good morning. He talked about the weather and the condition of the north fence. Elena matched his tone exactly. She was warm, she was calm, she asked about the fence. She helped him with breakfast. She washed the dishes while he went outside to start the morning work. And then she moved very fast. She had 40 minutes, maybe 50, before he came back to the house for his mid-morning coffee. She went to her room and pulled the bottom drawer fully out of the dresser. Her passport was still there, flat against the wood beneath it. She put it in the inside pocket of her coat. She took the $11 from inside the toe of a boot in her closet. She put on her coat, her best blue wool coat, the same one she had worn on the plane 6 weeks earlier. She left everything else behind. Her clothes, her suitcase, the few books she had brought, the photographs of her mother. She walked out the front door and down the porch steps and across the yard, and then she was on the road that led from the farm to the highway, walking fast, her breath coming out in white clouds in the frozen air. She had calculated the distance in her head weeks ago based on everything she had observed from the car. The highway was approximately 2 miles from the farm gate. She had once seen a gas station at the intersection about half a mile further. Gas stations had phones. People stopped at gas stations. The world existed at gas stations, the real world, the one with strangers who did not know Dale Mercer and did not owe him anything. She walked the 2 miles in just under 30 minutes. Her feet were cold. The road was empty. 2 cars passed her in the opposite direction and one slowed, a woman behind the wheel who looked at her for a long moment before driving on. Elena kept walking. The gas station was there, exactly where she had calculated it would be. A small place, 2 pumps, a tired-looking building with a handwritten sign in the window advertising cigarettes and lottery tickets. A man was filling his truck at the nearer pump. Inside, behind the counter, a teenage boy was looking at his phone. Elena walked inside and stood at the counter. She told the boy she needed to use the phone. He looked at her for a moment, then slid his own phone across the counter without saying anything. She picked it up and dialed the 10 numbers she had memorized. It rang twice. A woman answered. Elena said her name. She said she was a Ukrainian national on a K-1 visa and she needed help. She said she was at a gas station on Route 34 in Hartwell County and she needed someone to tell her what to do next. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not, but her voice was. The woman on the phone, who worked for an immigration and domestic crisis organization called Safe Harbor, Colorado, told her to stay exactly where she was. She told Elena she was doing the right thing. She said someone would be there within 90 minutes. Elena thanked her. She gave the phone back to the boy behind the counter. She sat down on a plastic chair near the door, folded her hands in her lap and waited. 45 minutes after she left the farm, Dale's truck came tearing down the highway past the gas station. He slowed. He looked in. She could see his face through the window, the shock of it, the fury underneath the shock. He pulled into the lot. She stood up. The teenage boy behind the counter was watching now, sensing something. The man who had been filling his truck had come inside and was also watching. Elena walked to the counter and stood behind it, putting the counter between herself and the door. Dale came inside. He looked at her. He said her name. He said they needed to go home. She said no. It was the first time she had said that word to him, clearly and without softening it, without the quiet voice and the careful eyes. Just no, flat and final, in front of witnesses. He stood there for a moment that felt very long. Then he turned around and walked back to his truck and drove away. The boy behind the counter looked at her and asked if she was okay. She said yes. He slid a bottle of water across the counter and told her it was on the house. She thanked him. She sat back down in the plastic chair and drank the water and watched the highway through the glass door. 90 minutes later, a Safe Harbor van pulled in. The story did not stay quiet for long. In a town as small as Hartwell, nothing ever did. Berta, the neighbor half a mile down the road, heard from a friend who had a son who worked at the county sheriff's office. Within a week, people in the surrounding area knew the basic outline. The mail-order bride from Ukraine had walked off the Mercer farm and been picked up by some kind of women's organization. Dale Mercer had driven down to the gas station and she had refused to go with him. People had opinions, as people always do. Some felt sorry for Dale, who was, by most accounts, not a violent man and had never been in any legal trouble. Some said the whole mail-order bride system was exploitative by design and everyone involved knew it going in. Some said Elena was brave. Some said she was ungrateful. Some said the whole situation was complicated and could not be reduced to one person being entirely right and the other entirely wrong. Elena, for her part, was not interested in what Hartwell thought of her. She spent her first 3 nights in a safe harbor shelter in the city of Pueblo, 40 miles from Hartwell. She was given a bed, hot meals, access to a phone, and the name of an immigration attorney who worked pro bono with women in her situation. She called her mother in Ukraine on the 2nd night, and it was the first time in 6 weeks that she had cried. Not during the weeks on the farm. Not during the walk down the frozen road. Not when Dale had looked at her through the gas station glass. She cried that night in a shelter bed, talking to her mother's voice on the phone. The legal situation was complicated but not hopeless. Elena's K-1 fiancé visa required her to marry within 90 days of arrival or return home. She had not yet reached 90 days. Her attorney filed paperwork documenting the circumstances and applied for a U visa, which is available to immigrants who are victims of certain crimes and who cooperate with law enforcement. Elena spoke with a sheriff's deputy. She told him everything: the restricted calls, the confiscated notebook, the controlled access to transportation. The deputy listened carefully. He said Dale had not technically broken any law in a way that was easily prosecutable, but that what she described was consistent with patterns of coercive control. He filed a report. Dale never reached out to her directly. Through his own attorney, he submitted documentation to the immigration authorities claiming she had abandoned the engagement without cause. The immigration case moved slowly, as these things always did. Elena found a part-time job at a Ukrainian bakery in Pueblo, run by a woman who had immigrated 20 years earlier and who hired Elena without asking many questions. She started English language classes. She started saving money. 6 months after walking off the Mercer farm, Elena was still in the United States, her visa status still technically under review. But Safe Harbor had connected her with a journalist who wrote a long, careful article about the structural vulnerabilities of the K-1 visa system, how women who arrived under this pathway were often isolated, economically dependent, and legally attached to a man they barely knew. The article used Elena's story as its central case, with her full consent. It ran in a national publication and was shared widely. The response was significant. Lawmakers in 2 states used the article in public statements about the need for reform. A nonprofit that worked with immigration victims saw a surge in donations. Several women in similar situations reached out to Safe Harbor directly after reading the article. Elena did not read the comments on the article. She already knew that some people would decide she was a victim, some would call her a scammer, some would call Dale a monster, and some would call him a victim too. People needed their neat stories, their clear villains and clean heroes. She had stopped waiting for anyone to arrange her life into a shape that made sense to them. She was doing that herself now. A year and 2 months after arriving at Denver International in her pale blue coat, Elena Vaskov was granted legal status to remain in the United States. She stood outside the federal building in Denver on the afternoon she received the news and called her mother again. This time she did not cry. She stood in the pale winter sun and looked at the wide, flat horizon of this enormous country and felt, for the first time, that she was not passing through it. She was here. She had chosen to be here on her own terms, at a cost that no one who had not paid it could fully understand. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything.